The Earth has experienced 5 major ice ages, each of which have developed from unique circumstances, and each of which have left a unique mark on the Earth. However, determining the causes and effects of these periods of dramatic cooling is sometimes very difficult and not a bit contentious. So it is with the Sturtian glaciation. The Sturtian glaciation occurred about 650 million years ago during the Paleo-Proterozoic era, which began approximately 2.4 billion years ago. It is during this particular period of cooling that it is thought that a sheet of ice covered the entire globe. Scientists have struggled, however, to identify what conditions could cause such a vast glacial formation, particularly in regions below the equator. Furthermore, if a scenario could be hypothesized for the complete encapsulation of the Earth, creating a snowball Earth, it is equally as difficult to say how the Earth could have warmed and evolved out of this deep freeze, and even beyond that, been capable of supporting life to the degree that followed, which we now know as the Cambrian explosion. So we really have 3 major questions that need to be answered when discussing the possibility of a snowball Earth, a complete Earth in deep freeze. These 3 questions are: what could cause a complete glaciation of the Earth? How could enough life survive during such a period? And how could the Earth, without an exterior force, emerge from such a hard freeze? Current evidence for the complete encapsulation of the Earth includes evidence in rock strata. There are many minerals found in Africa and in the Sahara Desert and in South America, which do not occur naturally in these regions of the Earth. They could only have wound up in such consistent deposits in the southern hemisphere because of a glacier pulling them down from more northern regions. So the evidence we have is this consistent evidence of in the rock strata, and these deposits are so widespread that it is reasonable to hypothesize that the Earth must have been at one time completely covered by a glacier or a series of glaciers which at some point met and formed one sheet of ice. It is thought that once this glacier reached a size so great that it encompassed or it crossed what is known as critical latitude, namely 30 degrees north and south. An ice cap this large, it is thought, would be large enough to actually change the atmosphere of the Earth. So the atmosphere of the Earth first cools more than average, enough so that a large glacier or multiple large glaciers could form. When this happens, they cross 30 degrees north and south, and a glacier of this size would be cool enough to then further cool the atmosphere such that this now mass glacier would then continue to ebb down and completely encompass the Earth, meeting with the Antarctic ice caps. There is at this time no definitive answer, however, for how this could take place, how the atmosphere of the Earth could actually be cool enough to support multiple glaciers of this size to begin with. There is one such proposal made by the Tokyo Institute of Technology in 2012, which posits that starbursts in the Milky Way caused cosmic dust particles to settle in the Earth's atmosphere in such a manner and in regular enough intervals to slowly interfere with the Earth's natural greenhouse process of preserving heat. In other words, at some point during the Proterozoic period, the Earth came in contact with a nebula, such as dark clouds or supernova remnants, which led to the destruction of parts of the ozone layer and a breakdown of the Earth's ability to retain heat, resulting in the equivalent of 10% less solar energy, or the Earth was losing about 10% of the heat which it gains from the sun, which would have been adequate for the formation of glaciers large enough to reach this critical latitude and join to reach critical latitude. Another possible theory for the initiation of snowball Earth is the breakup of the supercontinent Rodinia. This theory posits that when the continent was broken up, the ecosystem of enough plant life was disturbed that millions of plants died, were lost, and thus the carbon cycle of the Earth's atmosphere was also disturbed. Lots of plants died, which resulted in not as much carbon dioxide being produced, which means that the Earth would also be less insulated and less able to preserve heat to approximately the degree of about 10% again. But if this theory is true, then it begs the question of how any life survived following the breakup and the following glacial formation. If so much plant life died to cause these glaciers, then how could there possibly be enough plant life left after the formation of these glaciers and during the continued period of complete encapsulation that we could have the Cambrian explosion afterwards, or how there could even be an afterwards? It is currently thought that deglaciation, or the breaking up of this giant ice cap, was caused by millions of years of volcanic eruptions, causing an increased concentration of CO2 in the Earth's atmosphere, which eventually was great enough to increase the greenhouse effect enough that it would melt these glaciers over the period of hundreds of thousands of years. The acknowledgement of the existence of this much volcanic activity above the ice caps also suggests and is the reason that many species of plants and animals, microbial life primarily, not only existed but could have thrived during this period of deep freeze. The constant spewing of ash and debris would have meant that, supposing this hypothesis is true, the Earth would have been more of a mud ball really than a snowball, with layers of debris accumulating on top of the ice cap below, so keeping the ice cap cold, but also providing a place where life could exist in what we could presume would be very deep layers of debris. These volcanoes would also have likely caused cracks in the ice caps or pools of water around the volcanoes. In these layers of debris and cracks, and in these pools, there would have been ideal conditions to preserve basic life. This theory, however, makes the Earth sound less like a snowball and more like slushball Earth or mudball Earth, which kind of defeats the idea and contradicts the whole idea that the entire southern hemisphere, the very volcanic part of the Earth, that we think of the southern Pacific, for instance, was at some time frozen completely solid. It is unlikely that we will be able to say exactly what state the surface was in, the entire surface of the Earth was in, for any particular point of time in the Paleoproterozoic era, given that many different glaciers would have been in various stages of transgression and recession throughout the era. However, we can be sure that there were glaciers covering the vast majority of the Earth at some point during this period, and that life was definitely thriving at the same time. It has been proposed that life was preserved during the Sturtian glaciation because of a number of reasons we just mentioned, cracks in the surface and pools near volcanoes. But the most important catalyst of life may have been volcanic activity below the ocean surface. The oceans have been home to the majority of the world's volcanic activity for millions of years. Millions of years even before the Sturtian glaciation, before these large glaciers would have began to really develop. This volcanic activity takes place in some of the deepest parts of the ocean through vents. Vents which would likely not have been affected by a passing glacier or two. With this in mind, it seems entirely plausible that a large number of marine species could have thrived in the deepest parts of the world's oceans as they do today, around these hot deep-sea vents. Thus, we can now see plausible answers to each of our three major questions. We have two plausible reasons for how the Earth's atmosphere could have cooled to create large glaciers which could have crossed critical latitude. We have multiple ways that life could have been preserved in diverse ways and advanced enough to produce a Cambrian explosion. And we now understand, given the amount of volcanic activity which we can document from this time period, volcanic activity which would have produced enough CO2 to melt such large glaciers, we now do have these answers to our major questions. But while we do have these entirely reasonable hypotheses, there are many mysteries yet to be solved about the Paleoproterozoic era of Earth's history and the Sturtian glaciation. Many questions which may not be answered for many more years to come.